That's exactly what I did.
Okay. Good Chodesh, good Yantif. It's the Rebbe actually called the Rosh Kislev a Yantif. 1989, Tashmim Tes. Good Chodesh, good Yantif, because this is the day of the Rebbe's recovery from the heart attack, and the Rebbe is not just an individual. So we have Mr. Shem very, very big farbrengen tonight. It's been very big because Shmuel Dahan's coming, but meanwhile, let's not lose our focus right now, which is to learn a few halachas of tzitzis. There's in the Torah a few psukim about tzitzis. One pasuk we say every day in davening, in Shema, is Asulam tzitzis. You should make for yourself tzitzis. What are tzitzis? Another pasuk says gedilim ta'asam. You should make gedilim. What's the difference between gedilim and tzitzis? Tzitzis means individual fringes. Gedilim means something which has been twined together. So we have to have, the Gemara says, both. If the part of your tzitzis are supposed to be tied together, and part of your tzitzis are supposed to be just plain strings. How much? So the Gemara says in Midaraisa, the Torah law, there's no amount. But the Gemara says that Gedilim, the Torah wants us to have 4 etzbois, the size of 4 fingers, and tzitzis, the strings have to be, the gedil, the gedil has to be the size of 4 fingers, and the tzitzis, the fringes have to be the size of 8 fingers.
That's the minimum.
What?
That's the minimum?
That's the minimum, the length. And but the Gemara adds, it's more beautiful for the tzitzis if the gedil, if the part that's knotted together is 1/3 of the entire thing. So it's supposed to be that the strings are twice as long as the part that's knotted together. So the Ikar Adin, the main halacha needs to be Yud Beis Gudlim, needs to have the size of 12 fingers. But according to Arizal, the knots are not counted as part of the 4 fingers. In other words, in the tzitzis, there is the knots between the chulyos. There's a knots in between the part which is wrapped around. So the 5 knots are not counted as part of the 4 fingers, and therefore you need about 5 fingers of the part that's knotted together, and therefore the tzitzis has to be twice as long as that, which means how many fingers does it have to be?
8.
Twice as much as 5 is
10.
10. That's to be 10 fingers of the tzitzis and 5 fingers of the part that's knotted together.
Doesn't have to be like 12 good ones.
So that's Me'ikar Adin. That's the main halacha. According to Arizal, now the rings, you have to, since you don't count the knots, so therefore the 4 fingers is really 5 fingers. You're not counting the space of the knots. So if you don't count the space of the knots, it ends up being a little longer. So this is going to be about 5 fingers. Because you're not counting these as part of the length. Understand?
Yeah.
So the whole thing is going to be 15 fingers. But that's only by a talus cotton. By a talus gola, by a regular talus, by a talus cotton, there's 2 holes in the tzitzis. Since there's 2 holes, so the size of the beginning of the knotted area is right by the hole. Since there's 2 holes, so there's a knot attaching it to the 2 holes. So the knotted area begins already right in middle of the beged. But by a talus gadol, by the larger talus that we wear when we daven, that talus only has 1 hole, and the knot begins at the end of the corner of the talus gadol, and therefore you're going to need an additional 2 fingers, because halacha is that you have to have a distance from the place of the knot to the corner. You have to have a distance of 2 fingers, and so therefore you have to have that space not going to be counted as part of the length of the tzitzis. So you're going to end up needing a lot more. you're going to be needing something like if this is a size of 2, if this is two goodlin or 3 goodlin, so then plus 5 is 7, and then you'll need to have this. Will have to have 14. What? The talis gadol. The talis cotton, since it doesn't have, since it starts already by the beged, doesn't start by the end, starts already by the place where the hole is. So you can count this part already. By talis gadol, the knot starts over here. There's only one hole, so the knot starts at the end of it. So you make a knot by the talis gadol by stringing it through and making a knot at the end of the corner of the beged. Here, there's 2 holes, so you make a knot right by the. Right, and so there, for instance, 2 holes here. So right, so by a talis cotton, since you're able to make a knot immediately when it's attached, so it is counted. By talis gadol, since you can't make a knot till the end, that's where the knotted area begins. So by talis gadol would have to be longer. You have to because you have to have it says in the Gemara, no tzitzis. The beauty of a tzitzis is when the tzitzis, the strings, are twice as long as the knotted area. And since by talis gadol, the knotted area starts a little later, so it has to be even longer. Now, how many tzitzis do we need? It doesn't say in the Torah how many tzitzis we need, but we learn out, the Gemara learns out from the word gedilim. What does gedilim mean? Gedilim again means when something is twined together. So the minimum of in order to twine something together, you have to have at least 2 strings. So if it says 2 gedilim, how much is 2 gedilim?
4 strings.
2 gedilim is 4 strings. And we learn out from the words in the Torah, it says another pasuk, Torah says besides the tzitzis, the white tzitzis, you also have to have some tzitzis be colored. The words of the Torah are psil techeles.
It's not one, it's not some, it's only one.
What, the psil techeles?
Yeah.
There's 3 way machlekes about what exactly the techeles is. Is it 1 string? Is it 2 strings? If there's 3 way machlekes. Tesis, the Rambam, the Ravid, the final halacha is that you need to have 2 strings, tzitzis, white strings, and 2 strings, techeles, 2 and 2.
Both on the katan gadol.
Right. Both have to have 2 and 2. But so we learn out from the word psil techeles that you have to have 2 strings which are techeles. So you have 2 strings of that are white and 2 strings which are colored techeles. Nowadays we don't have the techeles, so instead of the techeles we have a replacement. It's not really the law of the Torah; it's a replacement of the white strings. It's interesting. According to Rabbi Yitzchak, he explains that according to Kabbalah, there's no purpose of having techeles during the time of the exile. So it's not like some people think, like, oh, we don't know which fish it is, and therefore we can't have it, and we found that we could do it. It doesn't apply nowadays, according to Kabbalah. The whole thing doesn't exist nowadays. On the other hand, I know someone who did have techeles, and because he found out the Chabad custom is not to have techeles, he asked the Rebbe in an audience what he should do. The Rebbe told him he should be the Matar Sandarim, he should annul his vow for the minhag toif. When you do have a good custom, you're supposed to annul a vow. So this is, but even though the Rebbe said to annul the vow, he also called it a good custom, which is interesting. Anyways, we don't know what the color is. We don't know how to make it.
The special thing that
Chilazin, the chilazin fish, right? So it doesn't exist. So some people say they found it. So I'm saying is, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, it's not possible to find it. Even if you did find it, it's not relevant. It's not relevant. Time goes. I'm taking the table, please. Stop shaking. Yes. You're still shaking the table. You want to stop? Thank you. Okay. So there's a difference in halacha between the original 2 strings, which are mandated min ha-Torah, and additional 2 strings, which are merely tashlumin, which are merely meant to supplement the tcheles strings. The difference in halacha and what they're in the obligation of these strings is we shall see. Okay, so one important point I want to mention before we get there, and that is there are certain halachas which are called gardumin. Gardumin means, or shiyarim, which means if you start off right, it works, even if you're left with something else. As long as you started off right, it's okay. So one example of that is you're supposed to have a distance between the holes and the corner. What if it rips and there's not much left till the corner, the beged rips? As long as you started it away from the corner, it's even a masher within a tiny bit is still okay. Yes, the chatchila, it has to be a distance away from the corner, but if it rips, it's allowed. It's kosher. Okay.
It can be repaired with the tzitzis still in it, or you have to start over again.
You don't need, even if you're not repairing it, it's still kosher.
But if you repair it.
If you repair it, what's wrong? Okay, so this is an important point. What's his question? His question, it says in the Torah, you should make tzitzis. You should make tzitzis. Since it says in the Torah, you should make the tzitzis. So if the tzitzis are suddenly ready-made by themselves, it's not a mitzvah. So therefore, there's a question about certain scenarios, whether or not you're allowed to kosherize the tzitzis, because maybe what you're doing is not creating tzitzis, it's just merely retroactively making them. For example, if all the tzitzis are tied together and you cut them in half, so now there's four corners of tzitzis. Or so regarding the corners, since it's kosher anyways, Beryl, so therefore you're not making tzitzis because they were tzitzis before. Similarly, as we'll see, there's halachas about how many tzitzis you need to have. So if the tzitzis are kosher still, so if you have, let's say you have one tzitzit, one string which cuts off, and let's say it's still kosher. We'll see there's two opinions about when it's kosher, what's not kosher. If it's still kosher, you're allowed to tie a knot to it and add another string. Why? Because you're not creating the tzitzis if the tzitzis is still kosher. If it's not kosher, and you cut off all the tzitzis, let's say you want to just now, okay, all the tzitzis are cut off, and you want to say, oh, there's a little bit of strings at the end. I'm going to recreate the tzitzis, and I'm going to glue some tzitzis to what's there. So as long as the tzitzis are still kosher, you're allowed to tie to it and add and supplement the 8 strings. But once it's not tzitzis anymore, then you're not allowed to.
You can actually tie a piece of something.
Yes.
Wow, that's a good.
As long as it's still tzitzis. But once it stops being tzitzis, and then you're making it into tzitzis, it wouldn't work.
If you have one string, it's broken.
If one string, for example, if one string ripped, as we shall see, then that would be an example of you could just tie another string to it, and you could supplement and have an 8th string, 100%. Okay. Now, okay, how do we know? There's two holes. So we know we're supposed to have part of the length is supposed to be, as I mentioned, tied, and part of it's supposed to be sit down, Zalman. Okay, and part of it's supposed to be strings. How do we know that? Maybe it's supposed to be that one half supposed to go from one side, from one hole you should have the tied part, and one part have the string part. How do we know that it's supposed to be all in one connected thing? So you have a branch, you have the tied, the knots part, and from the knots emerge the strings. How do we know that? We know this from the word in the Torah, psil. So there's 3 words the Torah says about tzitzis, and each of them teaches something else. There's one word thing we learned from the word gedilim, from the word tzitzis, and from the word psil. What does the meaning of the word psil? Psil is the same word that's used for a wick. How do you make a wick? Huh? So there's tvia and the shazira. Tvia and shazira means they have to be twined, and they have to be not just twined together, but spun. Twine means you have a string, and it has to be turned. It has to be spun. And besides being spun, it has to be also shazira, means that you have a few strings together, and they are all spun together. So our custom is, it's not clear where this custom comes from, that we have kafel shmeina. Kafel shmeina means that in each string we have 8 strings. We have one string, and you add, and to that one string, on the very thin string, you add another string, and to those 2 strings, you add another 2, and you take 4 and 4, so you have 1 and 2 and 4, so then you have 8 strings altogether. So each string of tzitzis has 8 strings. In the Bais Hamikdash, there were some things that had 8 strings, and some things had more. Like the pareiches in the Bais Hamikdash had far more. The pareiches had 24 strings. So tvia is a mitzvah and shazir is a mitzvah. Spinning it is a mitzvah, and twining together many strings together is also a mitzvah. Some people put a little knot. See, it might sit on the top of the tzitz, is a little bit frayed. If it comes undone completely, it's not kosher. Some people they put glue on the top, which is okay. Some people put a knot on the top, which is not so okay because they put a knot. It's like adding a knot to the tzitzis. But putting glue is not a bad idea, so that it will stay and so it shouldn't unwind.
If you cut it, it will also be like even, and it'll take a while to unwind again. Trim it a little bit.
Is it okay to cut? I mean, for sure, if you cut it,
If it's not too short.
you should still for sure put the tzitzis away, and they're holy, they're part of a mitzvah. Okay, so we learn from the word psila that it has to be that the tzitzis have to have shazira, that they have to be made of many strings. We learned something else in the word psil. This is in halacha, there are certain ways of deriving halachas which are considered more weighty and things which are considered less weighty. For example, from the let's say l'chaim for your grandfather's neshama. What's his name?
Aryeh ben Yaakov.
Aryeh ben Yaakov Shemash Avon Aliyah. With the better
Amen.
family, all good.
Amen.
So yeah. We learn another thing from the word psil, but this limud is more of a weaker limud. It doesn't have the same halachic strength as a first limud. So that the second limud that I'm going to share with you, there are leeways and loopholes when this does apply and when this doesn't apply. The second thing we learn from the word psila is that when you have these 4 strings, you have to put them through the holes so that they'll emerge on 2 sides, and you have altogether 8 strings. You put it through the hole. You have 4 strings. 4 strings go through the 2 holes, and you come out from both sides. So we learn out from the word psil. That's what you're supposed to do. You have to have 8 strings. How do you have to have 8 strings? The Torah says psil. What's psil mean? That you should have the 4 strings of the tzitzis should be made together as they should be doubled. How should they be doubled? By putting them through the hole. So because this again is not such a strong limud, so therefore there are halachic ramifications as we shall see. Okay. So lechatchila, the Gemara says that the tzitzis have to be yud beis gudlin, but if they are at least kadei aniva, they're kadei aniva, which is a size to make a bow, to make 2 bows, a bow on each other, whatever the word kadei aniva means. It's about 1 3/4 inches or 2 inches. Between 2 and 3 inches, some say. Either way, if it's that size, so then it's still kosher.
There's a difference. There's only one side.
Hold on, one second. That's the words of the Gemara. The words of the Gemara is if it has the aniv, it's still kosher. What's the Gemara referring to? Is the Gemara referring to all the tzitzis, or referring to some of the tzitzis? So there's an argument. One opinion is that the Gemara is only referring to the replacement tzitzis of the tchelas, which means that the original tzitzis, the tzitzis which are meant to be white, those tzitzis which are meant to be white, they have to be whole completely. And if not whole completely, it's not kosher. Only the tzitzis which are replacement of the tchelas, which we don't have, those tzitzis are allowed to be kadei aniv. So according to that opinion, there's a big problem. If you even have 3 strings cut off. Why? Because if you have 3 strings cut off, so it could be those 3 strings are from, you don't see in the tzitzis that you have, you don't see where they come from. You don't see, you put in 4 strings into the tzitzis. So if you have 3 strings which are cut off, it could be those, and not only if they're not, even if they're cut off completely, if they're cut off in a way that, again, this opinion holds that the 2 strings which are the original white strings of the tzitzis, they have to be completely whole. So if you have less than 6 strings, you're gonna have a problem. Why? Because that means that you don't have the 2 original strings aren't whole. Because the 2 strings which go into the tzitzis, they turn into 4. But when you have let's say, for example, I don't get everyone confused. Let's say, for example, you have 1 tzitzis which is cut off. So that 1 tzitzis which is cut off, it could only have come from one of the four strings. If you have two which are cut off, they can come from one string, and they may come from two strings. You don't know. If you're supposed to make the tzitzis in a way that the original four tzitzis emerge on both sides. You're supposed to keep a calculation that you have 4 and 4. The 4 and 4 you have, they went in the tzitzis originally that way, but you have 4 on each side.
Are you allowed to have 9 strings?
9 strings. You're supposed to have what it says in the torah. That's what's not supposed to add. The Rambam says if you add another corner, you're going against the mitzvah and the torah, because it's not supposed to add mitzvahs. But I don't know if you add another strings, you're going against the mitzvah and the torah, but it's not, you're not supposed to. Yeah.
When you tie the long string, the shamash, then the 3 remaining strings on that side, you tie them together and they're not at the end. So that they all stay together. And so these 4 strings will always be together, so they will be on one side. Then you'll have the 4 strings on the other side. So then you can tell if you have broken strings are all on one side, you still are kosher.
Okay, but when you get to the end of the tzitzis though, and you have the 2 knots there, and then the strings, you could lose calculation.
Why could you lose that
Because
they're all going to be together.
They'll all be together. So where's the 4 and 4?
Because you
could.
Shamash sticks with the ones that are tied, the 3 that are tied together. That's on that side, or the whole way.
If the shamash,
and then after you tie the knot with all the 4, then you untie the little knot at the end to free up the 3. Then you have them all on one side.
so I want you making tzitzis for me because you're very careful about it. That's great. That's fantastic. But if you aren't, so if you aren't, okay, great. So if you're careful, and the 4 and 4 are from the original tzitzis, right? You still don't know when 2 tzitzis come off on 2 sides, right? One tzitzis comes off from one side, one tzitzis comes off from the other side. You don't know if it's in the same string or not. It may come from 2 different strings, right? It comes off from Sten Zalman. Let's say you have 4 and 4 over here, right? And one string comes off from this side, and one string comes off from this side. You don't know if those 2 strings that came off are from the original same string or not. So, right, exactly. You don't know. So if it's an original string, so then it's great because only 1 tzitzis is now cut. But if it's from 2 different strings, now 2 tzitzis are cut. And if now another string tzitzis is cut, now if another string is cut, then you may be cutting the 3 of the original tzitzis, and that's not kosher. And therefore, this opinion holds that when the Gemara says that you have to, that it's kosher as long as you have kedei enough to make a bow. The Gemara is talking on a scenario where you have 1 tzitzis cut off on one side, and the other side of the same tzitzis, the other side of the same string has to still have kedei aniva. Although the replacement tzitzis don't have to be whole, they at least have to have kedei aniva. So, and that means all 4 strings at least have to have kedei aniva on
One side or
on both sides. So if you have a tzitzis which is cut off on one side, it has to at least have on the other side kedei aniva.
And that's why it's easy to tell if it's the silk chelos, because it's a different color.
So 1 second. So if you have, it's possible to make, I don't know if it's halachically sound or not, but it's possible to make the 4 strings to be 4 different colors. Then you can actually keep track of which tzitzis it is. I don't know anybody who does that. But either way, so if you have 2 tzitzis cut off on one side, that's fine. They're for sure from two different strings, and that's okay. But if you have 1 tzitzis cut off on one side and 1 tzitzis cut off from the other side has to at least have kedei aniva. Otherwise, it's maybe that one tzitzis is completely cut off. I think Rabbi Zalman is hinting to me that it's time for me to go. Okay, so that's one opinion. We'll see just briefly the other opinion. The other opinion is very, very lenient. The other opinion is that they hold that as long as you have kedei aniva in all even if you have 4 tzitzis cut off completely on one side, they say that when the Gemara says that all you need to have left is to make a bow, they say that refers to all the tzitzis. and the original and the tzitzis, which are a replacement of the tchelas, they can be cut off completely. So they say you could have 4 tzitzis cut off completely, and the other 4 is kedei aniva. They don't make this distinction of the original of preserving the original 2, and they have to be whole. They say don't worry about the original 2. You can cut off completely one side, and as long as you have kedei aniva of 4 tzitzis, you're good. Okay, we'll stop over here. נכון.